A while ago I did a video on how to check if a wheel bearing is worn. Now that was the title of the video, and the only unfortunate thing I ran into with the video was I didn't really at the time have a vehicle with a wheel bearing that was worn to really illustrate what I wanted to show as far as a symptom and how to really check if you suspect you have a worn wheel bearing. So the very first thing you want to do if you're checking for a worn bearing, this is the front of the vehicle, so we're looking for a worn front wheel bearing, which are the ones that tend to go because the front of the vehicles tend to carry more weight with the engine up front in all these front wheel drive vehicles. So you want to have your vehicle jacked and safely supported. Then you're going to grab the tire and you're going to give it a horizontal shake side to side. Now, as I say, this is a severely worn wheel bearing, so it's good for the purpose of illustrating this in the video, but you may not have, it may not be as excessive as this when you're checking. You could actually hear that bearing clunking around there as I move this tire. Now if I give it a vertical shake, be careful if you're doing this, as I say, jack safely supported, and you want your hand not underneath the tire in case something catastrophic happens. You want it to the side, so if the vehicle actually dropped, it's not going to drop on your hand. So what we can see here, and hopefully this is showing up in the video, is we have vertical movement. You can see the rim moving there, and we have horizontal movement, which tends to be the biggest indication of a worn bearing. If we just had horizontal movement, could still be a bearing. They wear in different patterns sometimes, but could also be a tie rod end or something like that. So that's step one. Next, I'm going to remove the rim here. We're going to see the rotor and actually where the hub and bearing are, and we'll check it from that point. What we're looking at here is the top view looking down. There's the rotor here. Down here we have our drive shaft going through our steering knuckle. So just to get your bearings, here's our rotor, which is screwed to the front of the hub and steering knuckle. So our bearing is going to be in this. Here's the end of the drive shaft here, where my finger is. So that's the drive shaft coming through. It's spinning within the bearing, which is in the hub in here, in this whole steering knuckle. But we're not really too concerned about the whole details of that. We want to just check to see if it's worn here. So what I'm going to do is shake the rotor, because the rotor is attached to the whole assembly. And back here is the drive shaft, which really shouldn't be moving because it should be snug within that wheel bearing. But in the case of a worn bearing, if I take this and shake it, top and bottom, hopefully this is coming through, you can actually see that drive shaft moving. Just to, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but just to kind of explain what we're looking at. Now here's the drive shaft. So when we look down there, and we're looking at this end of our drive shaft with the splines on it coming through. This is the part that spins within that hub and bearing assembly. So this, if you look at the rubber outer section of that, is what we're looking at down here. Get my finger in there without blocking the light. Is the drive shaft right in there. So as I say, what you want to do is take it top to bottom, shake, and I can feel that rotor and whole assembly moving, and that's because the bearing, try this again from a little different angle, the bearing is worn. and it's allowing this whole thing to move within the bearing itself. The steering knuckle here isn't moving. Those parts are moving because they're not secured because the bearing is worn. So, it is now evening. I've been at this all afternoon, and the bearing has been replaced. I got involved in a couple other things. I put a new shield on here. The other one was rotted out. It's a windy night here. I'm finishing up this job, so hopefully I'm going to be able to show the difference here. Note the drive shaft, and now with this good bearing in, as I shake the whole assembly, hopefully you'll see that that little bit of movement that does occur there is along with the movement of the steering knuckle. So I'm grabbing it over here on the caliper, the other side close to the tie rod end, and I'm shaking the whole thing, and you can see that there's very minimal movement there in the drive shaft, and what movement there is, it's actually moving in unison with the steering knuckle as it moves. So that's the way it should look. Now I'm hoping I'll be able to show this. Wheels back on. We got a crazy windstorm happening outside, so hopefully a big gust of wind won't come along when I'm doing this. I'm going to shake it. That's my horizontal shake. Hopefully you can see the difference there. Not really any movement at all. Again, the vertical shake. Everything's blocked. Hands not under the wheel. So you can see that bearing issue has been fixed, and hopefully that'll give you an idea, a couple of things to look for if you're troubleshooting a worn bearing.